business athletes, what is going on? Coming back at you with another action-packed episode where we reveal and uncover all the things that you need to know to become that superhuman 2.0 best version of yourself for the vision of your life, for your family, and mostly for you. So today's topic is GLP-1 Peptides Explained, Ozempic, Semaglutide, and the truth about fat loss drugs. So today, I want to do a bit more of a deep dive on the GLP-1s, also known as Semaglutide, Tirzepatide, and Retatrutide. So GLP-1, 2, and 3. And the reason why I wanted to do this episode is because this is a very hot topic right now. And many of you guys will have heard about these or you will be using them. And I will tell you there are important things that you need to know. There's important things you need to factor in. They're very important things that you need to do when it comes to your diet and training. Otherwise, you will just lose a ton of weight. You'll just lose a ton of total weight. Like you'll lose muscle as well. This is where you see people starting to get skinny fat. So they're losing a lot of metabolically active tissue alongside the fat loss, which is not good. When you lose muscle mass, you accelerate aging, period. And so it's really important that you cross your T's and you dot your I's with this one. So I did an episode on peptides, I believe it was like episode 4 or 5, where I talked about peptides as a whole. And peptides are one of these sections of supplementation that it's a very broad topic. It's a very broad topic. There's a lot of different peptides out there. And for those of you who don't know anything about peptides, they're basically little short chains of amino acids that many of them you have to inject. And it basically tells your body to upregulate or downregulate something it already naturally does. So it's almost like a blueprint. It's like a blueprint in your body to, hey, like turn up the production of this thing or turn down the production of this thing. And so for that reason, it's almost, I would say, it's got a better safety profile in general because it works within constraints that your body currently has. You're not injecting some sort of exogenous random compound that is literally coming in and your body's like, what is this? Well, I'm going to have some massive reactions. But people can still have reactions. There's still important things to know. So we're going to dive into this. And I would tell you that hang around and listen to this episode because I'm going to talk about some key fat loss components as part of this conversation. You got to remember that the whole reason why people use GLP-1 peptides is to enhance fat loss. So as part of this conversation, this is essentially going to be like fat loss 101 because I can't have that conversation about optimal fat loss with GLP-1s without actually talking about some of the other mechanisms of action and the things that you need to do to actually set yourself up to create the best body composition change possible. So, and we will be covering each of them, but I will be focusing predominantly on GLP-3, which is Retatrutide, because that's the newest generation. But I will also be covering the first two because I realize a lot of people that go through a clinic and have a doctor's prescription, currently they'll only be able to get access to those things. And I'll explain the confusion and I'll explain why you can get access to some things and sometimes you can't. Because there's some legal loopholes that we need to discuss that will help you understand what's going on in this space. So, either way, this is going to relate to you in some way, shape, or form. Now, I will always preface this and start off by telling you that you don't need these compounds to see amazing results. And I know this because I've used peptides for years, but I've microdosed Retatrutide on and off, and I was able to get to my body composition without it. I've been able to help many students get to optimal body composition without it. But I'm going to talk about some instances where it is very useful. And my whole role is to not give you, a sales pitch around why you should use it or to instill fear into you as to why you shouldn't use it. is to give you some of the pros and cons and then let you make an informed decision. That's the thing. I want you to just be able to make a more educated decision. So, what are GLP-1 peptides? So GLP-1 stands for glucagon-like peptide 1. Basically, think of it like a little hormone that's naturally produced in your gut. So your gut naturally produces this. And there are certain foods and things that can help with the proliferation of this. You know, one supplement that I will use on and off strategically is berberine. So berberine is a Chinese herb that's been shown to have GLP-1-like effects. So there are other things that you can use or stack in to complement this. Now, what this little hormone from your gut does is it basically signals fullness to the brain. So think of a time where you ate a massive meal and you get to the end of the meal and you just feel stuffed. Like you all of a sudden lose interest in food. I mean, think about it. After you've had a big Thanksgiving meal, you're not salivating over more food. At a certain point, the idea of more food almost repels you. You're like, I'm so full. I have zero cravings right now. I have zero signal to want to eat. Well, this peptide essentially signals that fullness response in the brain early. So it gives you that sensation, but it gives you that sensation early where you're not having to eat as much or as often, and you'll have that sense of fullness. And so there's some things that you need to be aware of when it comes to that too. And I'll explain why. But beyond that fullness sensing, it helps improve insulin sensitivity. This is one of the reasons why I like to microdose it, because it helps with insulin sensitivity. So hemoglobin A1C, fasting insulin. And basically insulin sensitivity is like a life extension tool. So if someone is diabetic, they will statistically take 10 years off their life. So if you increase your insulin sensitivity, not only will you reduce brain fog and you'll improve mental clarity, but you'll extend your lifespan. Because remember this, it's a lot of the ADHD symptoms that people feel with the brain fog and the inability to concentrate isn't actual ADHD, it's insulin resistance and blood glucose instability. And so again, that's also why this can be quite a useful little tool to test. One of the things that it does to reduce appetite is it slows gastric emptying. And so gastric emptying is basically how frequently you need to poop, how often you will have a bowel movement. And now, obviously, this is where you really need to be mindful. Like, I'm going to talk about this in more detail, because think about this. If you just jump straight in and you taper your dose up too high too fast, not only will you have some other issues with nausea and different things, but it can really slow your digestion down. And that's part of its mechanisms of action, is that, think about it, when you feel more full, those receptors in your brain get hit. So your brain realizes, I don't have as much room in the gut for more food. And so it hits these sense receptors that say, we're full, we are still full, don't send more food. And so that's when you get that sense of fullness. Now, there are three generations of GLPs, basically. So there's a GLP-1, which is Semaglutide. The brand names are also known as Ozempic and Wegovy, but the actual compound name as a peptide is called Semaglutide. That's like a version 1. The second version, GLP-2, is the brand names Mounjaro or Zepbound. Now, this one is known as a peptide, is known as Tirzepatide. And then the third one, GLP-3, is known as Retatrutide. So we've got Semaglutide, Tirzepatide, Retatrutide. The thing with Retatrutide is it's not legally out yet through doctors and prescriptions. So to use a compound like Retatrutide, you would have to go to a research chemical company, and you have to do your due diligence, You have to make sure it's a good one that has good third-party testing and quality controls and all that stuff. And you can get Retatrutide through a third-party research company. But there's a lot of caveats with that. And I'll explain what some of those are, because some of you guys are going to be like, well, where do I get it from? What's the best place to go? And I'm going to provide you with some potential solutions for that. Now, one thing I'll say right out of the gate is that peptides are an amazing resource, but there's a lot of them out there. Some of them will help with muscle building. Some of them will help with hair growth or with skin quality. Some of them help with injuries. Other ones help with sleep or libido. Some will be like anti-aging. Some of them will help with fat loss and hunger. Some will help with different organ systems in your body. So there's even a subsection of peptides called bioregulators. And so bioregulators will help with your heart or your kidneys or your pancreas or your prostate or your ovaries. So think of it almost like a oil change for your prostate or an oil change for your ovaries or an oil change for your liver. It comes in, and this process just basically helps rejuvenate and regenerate the cellular mechanisms in that particular organ to help it run like a younger version of itself. So all our organs in our body age at different rates. And depending on your lifestyle, depending on how you've lived, some of your organs will be accelerating in aging and others won't be as much. Think of this as almost like the fountain of youth for a specific organ system. So often when I'm working with someone that may have had a lot of heart issues or stroke, there'll be things that we'll do with like bioregulators for their heart or their vascular system. So basically for the vascular system, it can help with the endothelial lining of your arteries. Now, people will not realize that these things have been studied in Russia for 30 years. So in the US, a lot of people will say things like, peptides are dangerous, that they've only been around for a few years, you don't know what's going to happen long term. And I will say there is a case to be made for a lot of the common peptides that there's not a ton of human research. There is a good amount of animal research, but there's not a ton of human research in America. But there is a lot of good research on humans in Russia, and it's in Russian. Dr. Vladimir Kavinson, who was a Russian scientist, worked with the government. They used bioregulated peptides for soldiers, special forces, for a lot of the high level oligarchs. This is how it came to be, is that they were trying to figure out how to help the Russian cosmonauts coming back from space recover from being in space. All the issues that come with like the oxygen levels and lack of gravity and like muscle loss and the radiation and everything. So it came out of that, and they were very effective. There is very good research behind a lot of these. But again, it's not sort of quote-unquote FDA approved, and it's not in English, and it's not mainstream, widely known in America. So I say this, again, not to sort of say, oh, you just trust whatever peptides I suggest, it's all safe. But just to tell you that there is a track record and there's a history with these things. And they were pretty much demonstrated to be very safe long-term. There was very few real side effects. There are some small minor side effects, which I'm going to talk about, but there was nothing substantial. Like no one died from them. There was nothing obvious. And again, I don't want to go into... One of the things that I want to be wary of in this episode is I don't want to go down too many mega science rabbit holes where I'm sort of citing research papers and melting your brain with statistics and double-blind placebo-controlled trials. Because I think most people, they just want the basics and they want to understand things from a business athlete standpoint. Is this good for me or is it not? And what are the basic pros and cons of this, please? I don't need to know every single double-blind placebo-controlled research thing. A lot of the science nerds, they love to get into this stuff, and that's cool. They'll do that on their show, but for most people, it's so far over your head, and it doesn't really help you make a better decision as long as I can tell you, hey, these are the things you need to be aware of. So outside of bioregulators and outside of all these other types of peptides, the GLP-1 peptides have become quite popular. And for obvious reasons, because anything that's going to have a substantial effect on fat loss is going to be very popular, especially in America, because there have been so many drugs and procedures and protocols and things that people have tried, and typically they come with real side effects. Like a lot of the fat burning products out there are basically just stimulants. And I will often advocate against more stimulant use. So there's just thermogenics, things that basically increase your body temperature and they increase your heart rate and your respiratory rate. And I'm like, man, but people are stressed enough as it is. The last thing you really want to be doing on top of operating as a business athlete and as a spouse and as a parent and juggling all the things you do, and you're already probably sipping on a bit of coffee. The last thing you need to be doing is adding in more fat-burning thermogenics into the equation. That's just going to stress your nervous system out more. You'll typically notice you'll probably get more digestive issues. You'll sweat more, so you'll probably sweat more at nighttime, so you won't sleep as well. One of the things I had people ask me at times, what do you think about things like clenbuterol? Because I get questions from people asking about actual anabolic steroids. There are a lot out there, and there's a lot of people who want to try things. And I really do my best to advocate against those things at this point. Now, obviously, if you want to win Mr. Olympia, you're probably going to have to do things that are going to harm your health. But that's the trade-off that those people are prepared to make. Now, if someone came to me and said, hey, I want to use something like clenbuterol. So clenbuterol is a fat-burning compound, but it's a bronchial dilator. So it basically almost works like an asthmatic drug. So it opens up blood flow and your breathing rate and all these things. But what it does is it increases your resting heart rate too. So people can run the risk of heart palpitations. Your heart rate variability tends to drop. You won't sleep as well, like it will wire you. And I would tell you that, in my opinion, anything that starts to affect your sleep is going to have a negative net effect on your physiology, because the most anabolic hormones get produced when you're sleeping. Your testosterone and your growth hormone gets released then. It's why people that don't sleep well typically see more muscle loss. They've done research where they had two groups of individuals and they both lost 10 pounds, but one group slept for like 3 hours a night and the other one slept for 7 or 8. And the one that slept for 3 hours, they both lost 10 pounds. But this is crazy, but the group that didn't really sleep, they lost 3 pounds of fat and 7 pounds of muscle. Holy moly. And the group that slept well, they also lost 10 pounds total, but they lost 7 pounds of fat and 3 pounds of muscle. Now, obviously, you don't want to lose muscle at all. That's the ideal scenario, is you want to retain as much muscle as you can. And there are peptides you can stack with the GLPs to help prevent that. And there are certain ones that will be better at that than others. So this is where I was talking about the skinny fat stuff and the muscle loss at the beginning. So you got to know these things. But basically what it does is, again, that's the reason why it's so useful, because it helps with appetite control and fat burning effect and like how many calories you consume, but it's not a stimulant like your typical fat burning compounds. So it doesn't have that sort of strain and stress on your nervous system function. Now, the reason why the GLPs seem to work so well is because, one, it helps with appetite regulation. So rather than being a fat burner that tries to address fat loss from revving up your metabolism, and it doesn't really change your hunger, so you still eat as much, but now your body's just trying to burn more calories, which is more stress on your body. What it does is it actually works the other way around. So it reduces your hunger. So you don't have to burn so many calories. You don't have to diet so aggressively because you don't feel as hungry. You're not getting a bunch of cravings that you're having to fight all day long. Now, other benefits in my mind, and from the data, is that it can help with blood sugar regulation and insulin sensitivity. So what that means for you is that a lot of the peaks and troughs and the ebbs and flows in your day with brain fog or dips in energy, especially after you eat. Like if you eat lunch and then you notice a mid-afternoon crash, part of that, outside of maybe being too sedentary and you need to get out and take a walk in the sun, which is what I do every day, is that there's probably some type of blood sugar spike and crash. And I would put money on it that the diet, the things you're eating at lunch are spiking it too far up, and then you're crashing down. And that is blood sugar instability. So the GLP-1s help with stabilizing that spike and trough to make a more of a gradual curve. That's how you get more stable energy through the day. And the last thing that I found really interesting is that it seems to help with brain reward signaling. So I've noticed for a number of my students that if they have other addictions, other behaviors that they don't really want, maybe they vape, or maybe they drink alcohol, or maybe they do some type of sort of substance, cannabis. What I've noticed is that using consistent dosing, microdosing even, of the GLP peptides, it seems to reduce that compulsion. And my theory is that part of the reason why these work so well with appetite regulation is that it reduces down that sort of dopaminergic signaling that you get when your brain is like, oh, that smells really good. You're going to be really hungry. You want to eat those cookies. You have all those thoughts run through your head. Just think of any time you have a craving for something and any time you're about to eat something you shouldn't. You're having all kinds of inner dialogue about it before you actually physically do it. And what it seems to do is it seems to turn down that neurochemical signaling period. And so not only is it turning down that neurochemical signaling for food, but it seems to turn down that neurosignaling chemical for other dopaminergic addictions. So I would tell you that under the right guidance, if you have some other issue that you're sort of stuck on, it might be worth testing this. It might be worth testing this. So I've just noticed that because one of the beautiful things with all the students and all the people I coordinate with is that I get a lot of anecdata. I get a lot of anecdotal experiences coming back to me that I can kind of weigh up and cross-reference. So if someone says, oh, well, Sally down the road said that she did the GLP-1s and she went blind. Like, first of all, most people don't know anyone that's happened to. But the second thing is, like, there might be one person that they know and they weigh their whole opinion on one individual. And who knows what other things that individual was doing. And I'm going to talk about this, by the way. But my experience is that I get to see the blend, the spectrum of experiences. And I get to see the common threads and the common patterns. And I can start making sense of, okay, what is good and what's not. So basically, you think about GLP-1s having this ability to reduce appetite by acting directly on the brain's satiety center. And so that satiety center also ties into addiction stuff. So it's one of those things where I think that it's interesting to know that and pay attention to that. One of the funny things was that when they found this GLP-1 system, they were inspired by the venom from a lizard called a Gila monster, which naturally produces this peptide in higher amounts, and they barely eat. So people are looking at these Gila monster lizards, and they're like, how are they only eating, once a week or something? What's going on? And they notice that these elevations of GLP-1s in their gut, and they were like, hey, we have that in our system too. And that's how they started to realize, oh, wow, this actually has a role on satiety and hunger signaling. So the first thing that I want to talk about with GLP-1s, and when I say GLP-1s, just think I'm talking about all of them right now. So I'm talking about all of them. And then I will distinguish between ones when I feel like I need to. So basically, when they help with blood sugar levels, it's going to help with insulin secretion, insulin sensitivity, and glucose disposal. Now, glucose disposal is an interesting effect where basically what it does is when you eat food, your body breaks down that food into sugar, blood sugar in your body. And basically glucose disposal is where your body chooses to push that sugar. So what it does is if someone's really insulin resistant, it will usually just have that sugar sit in their bloodstream and it will elevate their blood sugar levels and they get brain fog, or it just pushes it into fat stores and they just get fatter and fatter and fatter. Now, with optimal glucose disposal, it pushes it into muscle cells as glycogen, and it pushes it into liver as stored liver glycogen. That's where you're going to store all those calories and sugar, in the right places. This is also, by the way, guys, why weight training is such an important part of this process. Because the way that you basically turn that signal on, or you actualize that particular signal, is you have to stimulate muscle mass. You want to stimulate the muscle mass, and what it does is, when that muscle mass is stimulated, it turns up that signal, and it makes it very, very geared towards that glucose disposal into your muscles. So originally, that's why this compound was developed for type 2 diabetes, because you could see how it could it basically help you manage blood sugar more effectively, which downstream helps with better fat loss. So again, I would say for people that have high hemoglobin A1C or fasting insulin, outside of things like I said, berberine is a herbal supplement that you can use. Cinnamon is another. Those things help with blood sugar stabilization. The consistent weight training is a key, but that is where the GLP-1s can help assist that. Now, another component of these peptides is that they work directly on the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is like a part of your brain that basically is involved with like hunger signals and food cravings and the reward response to a food. So that's, and what a lot of people will say is it feels like it turns the food noise down. Think of food noise a bit like when you are getting that voice in your head to say, just go eat the donuts, go eat the pizza. That pizza would be really good right now. You love cheese. You love the sugar. Have a pint of Ben and Jerry's. And you're like, you start almost salivating over the food, just thinking about it. Like Pavlov's dog, basically. And so what a really interesting benefit of this is that the food noise gets turned down. So yes, depending on your dose, you may still get some food noise, but you can titrate the dose to the point where you won't really get any food noise anymore. But there are trade-offs to that. So again, that's why you want to get help with these things. I would tell you right out of the gate, my Anomaly Project 6-week course, I don't go into peptides in that level. That's like the entry level. That's the start point. But in my Business Athlete Council and my one-on-one, I do go into more detail about these things. So I would tell you, even if you're just interested in peptides or just the GLP-1s, get into the Business Athlete Council for a few months just so you can get the right processes. Because what will happen if you don't, and I see this often, is people will start using a peptide and they take too much too fast, and they either feel really nauseous, they feel like they want to throw up, and they get really constipated. And it lasts for days because the half-life of these compounds is longer. They design them this way so you don't have to take shots every day. Because a lot of the peptides, depending on the half-life, you have to administer them daily or a couple of times a week. And so the half-life of these things is longer, which works well for people who don't want to have to take lots of shots. But it means that if you have an adverse response to something, it's going to linger in your system for a few days. So that's not enjoyable. So that's absolutely why you need to get good guidance at the front end. Not only to make sure you're using the right brands, but you're even administering them in the right fashion so you don't get an infection or have some issue crop up, and especially to get the dosing down so you get the benefits of the insulin sensitivity. You get the benefits of the brain signaling, and you get the fat loss benefit, but you don't get a ton of constipation and bloating and nausea because that does not feel good. And that typically only happens if someone just throws a massive dose in real fast and they didn't titrate in properly, right? Like I always say, the dose makes the poison. Now, one of the things that, like just tying into what I just said there, it slows down gastric emptying. So gastric emptying is essentially how fast your stomach breaks food down, pushes it through your digestion, and you poop it out. Now, this is where you have to be very mindful Because if you're already got digestive issues, or you're already a bit sensitive to digestion, this can make it worse if you do not pay attention to what you're doing. And what I would say is, on one hand, you want to make sure you adapt your dose slowly, but you also want to make sure that you're doing the right things in your diet that will help you improve your digestion. Because if you're getting digestive issues, part of it's probably you're consuming a lot of food sensitivities. There could be some processed foods that you're consuming that are really making it worse. There's probably foods that you could be adding into your rotation that might help with that type of stuff. One of the things that I'll often do, or get my family to do, is prunes or prune juice post-workout. So we tie it in post-workout to get the little glycogen push into the muscles, which is a benefit. And by the way, prunes are high in boron, so boron is good for male sex hormones with testosterone, and you get the benefit of helping with digestion. So when the food stays in your stomach longer, you can get nausea, you can get reflux, and feel constipated. So again, and you will be able to navigate those things if you dose it the right way. So if you dose it the right way and you run proper digestive protocols and you heal your gut, which again, in the Business Athlete Council, I have gut rehab protocols that people will run. I would say most people need to heal their gut in some way, shape, or form. If you've consumed alcohol, if you consume antibiotics, if you consume antacids or processed foods, which pretty much every single person on the planet has, you probably need to run a gut rehab protocol. Because remember, you aren't just what you eat, you are what you absorb. So if you want to increase how you perform and feel, and basically extract more nutrients out of the calories you're consuming, you need to increase absorption rates. And that's a part of it is a gut rehab protocol. And I've done whole episodes on gut rehab optimization and stuff like that. Now, one of the biggest issues for GLP-1s, and this is especially for Semaglutide and Tirzepatide, Retatrutide doesn't have this issue, which is, again, why it's worth trying to obtain that if you can. The muscle loss. So one of the things that they noticed with the Semaglutide in the studies was that up to 30 to 40% of the weight loss was potentially muscle loss. Now, there are some ways to mitigate that. So you're not just going to experience that across the board, even if you're weight training and even if you're doing everything right. But if you were just average Joe down the street who's 300 pounds and you just want to lose 100 pounds and you just take Semaglutide and you don't do anything, you'll lose a ton of muscle as well. So what you must be doing is you must be doing some type of intelligent weight training, resistance training protocol. Again, that's why I would get into my courses and stuff, because people don't realize that there's a hierarchy to how you should be training. If you want abs, what do you think is the best exercises to do to get well-defined abs? You think it's more abs? It's not actually abs. It's things like deadlifts and squats and these big compound movements. The bigger the muscle groups trained and the more muscle groups that are trained together, the bigger the metabolic and anabolic response it creates. And so just from a muscle preservation standpoint, things like deadlifts and squats are big full body movements that yield a big ROI for muscle building and muscle retention. So it's really important that you understand that weight training and resistance work is key when it comes to these, especially if you're on Semaglutide or Tirzepatide. Now, the benefit with Retatrutide is each generation has less and less and less of those issues. Outside of the weight training, you want to make sure you're getting about 1 gram of protein per pound of target body weight. So if you're 300 pounds and you want to be 250, you've got to get to 250. For the ladies, some of you ladies will undershoot the protein often. And you'll push your fats up too high, your carbs go up too high, and your protein's too low. And especially as you age. If you're a female, and especially as you age, your protein requirements are an essential. When you don't hit that, you will see overall muscle loss alongside the weight loss, and you'll start to downregulate your metabolism. And we don't want that. Outside of protein intake and outside of resistance training, you want to make sure that if you are using a GLP-1, you can potentially stack it with some type of anti-aging / muscle building peptide. So the growth hormone releasing peptides, for example, like tesamorelin or semorelin or CJC or ipamorelin. I'm a fan of tesamorelin and ipamorelin as a blend, and it's a growth hormone releasing peptide. So it's like an anti-aging peptide, but it also has muscle sparing effects. And what I would say is combining tesamorelin and ipamorelin in conjunction with something like GLP-1, aka semaglutide, has the fat loss effect, but it creates a heightened muscle sparing effect as well. Now, you can take it even a step further and get even more benefit if you were to use, say, Retatrutide, the GLP-3, and you stack tesamorelin and ipamorelin on top. And if you were to do that and then stack on IGF-LR3, you're really putting your body in a very anabolic position where I've seen students actually build muscle and lose fat at the same time. I will say, though, this is important. This is where you need to get your blood work run and get your IGF-1 levels checked. Because IGF-1 is a tightrope walk. Too much is not a good thing. Too little is not a good thing. You need to be in the Goldilocks zone. And what can happen is if you're stacking a couple of these peptides on top of each other, you might almost be pushing your physiology too far up. And if your IGF-1 levels go too high, one, it can age you faster. It's basically, it sort of accelerates cellular processes, even though it's anabolic. Now, the irony is that when you're in the Goldilocks zone, it actually slows down aging processes. If you're too low, it will also make you age faster. So it's almost like too hot, too cold, right in the middle. And so how do you determine what you should be using in terms of IGF-LR3 or tesamorelin and ipamorelin, and how do you even determine the dose? Well, you get your IGF-1 levels checked, and you connect with me into the business athlete group, and we get you on into that Goldilocks zone. That's the thing. Most people, especially if they just go to research chemical companies, they just do like these random stock standard doses, and they don't think about adapting them at all. Just cookie cutter stuff. And sure, that can work for some things, for some people. But what I would be saying is that if you use growth hormone releasing peptides and you never get your IGF-1 levels checked, that could be actually causing you more harm than good. And so again, having that good feedback, but definitely focusing on muscle preservation is absolutely key. Now, some of the other studies that I thought were quite interesting showed that the GLP-1s actually seem to like lower blood pressure and improve lipid profiles. So lipid profiles are your HDL cholesterol, triglycerides, your ApoB, like your small particle LDL. So basically your cholesterol markers. And in between improving cholesterol markers and lowering blood pressure, that's basically reducing inflammation. And when you reduce inflammation in those parts of your body, you're essentially reducing cardiovascular risk. So one of the studies, they actually saw like a major trial showed that there was a 20% reduction in cardiovascular events in high-risk patients. So it's one of those things where I think there's a lot of other benefits potentially of this outside of just fat loss that might be worth trying depending on where you are at in your journey. And making sure that you're paying attention to the effects that I said can happen. You know, because there are people out there that have claimed they've had all sorts of issues happen with using semaglutide, like Wegovy and stuff like that. The weird thing is, I've never, ever come across someone who's had any massive reaction like that. And it makes me wonder, what else were those people doing? Because they were sort of very conventional-looking people. They were people that looked like they'd go to Weight Watchers. So I'm sure that they were probably on a lot of other medications. They were getting Wegovy through their insurance. So generally, someone like that is not going to be a super health-conscious person. They're probably on a cocktail of other medications. Those other medications are probably going to have what's called contraindications. So they're kind of mixing together and creating an effect from mixing together. And they're just not eating healthy. They're not doing anything well. They're not even close to where you are at. And then they have all these like adverse responses. I've never seen that I've seen smaller responses. I've seen people get some digestive issues and get some nausea. Those are the two ones I've seen the most. And it varies in degree based on how crazy the person went with their dosing at the front end. And the only other time I've ever seen any issues with any peptides was with tesamorelin that kind of affected people's sleep. Now, ironically enough, it's part of its benefit is it typically helps people sleep. So it's kind of a little bit of an oxymoron in that instance, but it's not a common effect. But tesamorelin in a very odd person can increase their resting heart rate by like 5 to 10 beats per minute, which isn't massive, but it's not ideal. And I think that then affects sleep depth. But it's very uncommon. And you can usually tell pretty quickly. If you have a smart device, you can usually tell pretty quickly, and you just remove that compound from your rotation. And maybe you try a different type of growth hormone-releasing peptide instead. So it's an easy thing to troubleshoot. But I say all this because I just wanted to kind of frame up some of those issues in conjunction with some of these benefits around blood pressure, around lipids, around blood sugar levels, and that type of thing. Now, after semaglutide, the next one that came out was a GLP-2 called Tirzepatide. And think of Tirzepatide as it works on two pathways. It works on the GLP-1 pathway, and it works on the GIP pathway. And so GLP-1 works on one pathway, just the GLP-1 pathway. GLP-2 works on GLP-1 pathway and GIP. GLP-3, Retatrutide, works on GLP-1, GIP, and glucagon receptors. I know it's a mouthful. All this to say, you can sort of see what I'm saying here is that the first one works on one pathway, the second one works on 2, and the third one works on 3. And obviously, the one that works on 3 ends up having a better positive net effect. Because basically what it does is when it works on glucagon receptors, that helps with muscle preservation. So you can see here how they've basically got more advanced as they've gone and finding ways to manipulate these glucagon receptors and these GLP receptors more efficiently to sort of enhance the insulin sensitivity response. I will tell you that if you are thinking about using one of these, you've got to make sure that you have a good diet and training plan. I would not advise someone who's just coming out and they're shooting from the hip and they're just doing everything random. But what I will tell you also, some people will say, oh, you shouldn't have to use these peptides. You should just be more disciplined. I've seen that a lot. I've seen people say, it's basically cheating. It's the lazy man's way of fat loss. You're being lazy if you're using these. You need to cultivate some discipline. And I understand what that person is saying. I understand the principle behind that. But what I will tell you is that most people who say that, they've never actually had to work with someone who was 300 or 400 pounds and had a ton of food habits and psychological issues and food noise that really paralyzed them into being very overweight and very unhealthy. You haven't experienced those types of people. They have so much mental dysfunction and they have so many addictions, and their coping mechanisms are so heavily involved around food that there's literally almost no amount of discipline or mental strength that's going to get them from being 400 pounds to lose all that weight. Some people can do it, right? There are some people that can. But what I would tell you is that, in my mind, someone using one of these peptides, if it can help them lose all that extra body fat, the physiological benefit of them losing all that inflammatory body fat and as a byproduct, improving all their blood work markers is absolutely a lever worth pulling if someone's tried to lose weight many times and they've just failed repeatedly. Because sometimes you can have the best plan in the world and you can even have the meal prep. But if your food noise is so high that you have the meal prepped and you still want to order Domino's pizza anyway, that's a problem. And yes, there's other components to this. Yes, it's worth getting some psychotherapy and some counseling. Yes, it's worth getting in the right groups and the right environments. A lot of what I talk about in my Anomaly Project Mastermind group. I drop morning mindset messages into Telegram every day. A lot of what I talk about is around mindset, because I've seen time and time again, the person that has the more stable mind, they're able to implement the tactics more effectively. So it's a foundational principle. It's foundational. So when we are thinking about these different GLP-1, GLP-2, GLP-3s, what they noticed was that when they did these trials and these research papers, they noticed that when they were just testing semaglutide first, they noticed that the group that got semaglutide had, on average, they lost on average extra 15% of their body weight compared to the control group. The Tirzepatide group, they lost 20 to 22% compared to the control group. And the Retatrutide group lost 25+% compared to the control group. They also lost visceral fat, which is that dangerous inflammatory fat that sits around your organs, and basically is what causes metabolic syndrome. So metabolic syndrome is when you look at your blood work, it will be when you have high triglycerides, low HDL cholesterol, which is good cholesterol, high ApoB, and high blood sugar levels. That's like metabolic syndrome in a nutshell. And typically what you'll find is that's when you have that gut fat. Someone that's got that gut, the belly fat, that's visceral fat. These peptides were shown to be quite useful at improving those areas of the body. Now, I will tell you, if someone came to me and were like, do you think this is suitable for me? I would say the first thing is, where are you coming from? Have you tried to diet a lot, and are you really overweight and your health is really taking a hit because of it? Or are you someone that is maybe just, you're already doing okay, you already have some results, but you want to squeeze more out. You want to be more of a business athlete. You want to be more of a high performer. Or maybe you already are pretty good and you want to get like the other benefits. Maybe you're like, you know what? I wonder if I could microdose this and see improvements in insulin sensitivity and just kind of help with any other addictive tendencies that I have. I would say that any pathway of those is viable, but you want to make sure that you have a solid diet around this, because what it will make you do is it will make you just eat less food, less calories. So this peptide doesn't sort of magnify fat burning as much as it just helps you not eat as much food. Now, if you eat less food, and it's just, let's say you were really strict with your diet and you were really good at controlling your hunger and you just ate less food, period. If your diet was kind of sloppy, like if it wasn't very clean, if you weren't really crossing your T's and dotting your I's and doing a lot of the macro bowl principles I talk about in episode 11, where I'm talking about whole food proteins, protein rotation, eat the rainbow, where's my green, where's my red, where's my orange vegetables, rotating different types of whole food starches, root vegetables like Japanese sweet potato, purple potato for the antioxidants, all the way over to sort of jasmine rice, basmati rice, quinoa, and like adding in extra things like, mushrooms for adaptogens like lion's mane, fermented foods like natto or kimchi for the gut health benefit. If you're not doing a lot of those things to really maximize the nutrient range in your body, when you eat less calories, you just won't have enough fuel in your system to perform optimally. So what you'll often feel and see is you'll feel tired all the time. Your energy will be lower. You won't hold muscle as easily. And you'll probably just feel kind of foggy because you're now not only eating less food, but you're just getting less nutrients across the board. So when you consume less nutrients, it's even more imperative that the nutrients that you do consume is very high quality, high return. I talk about food as like a whole food matrix and like the ROI of a food. See, if I consume 2,000 calories a day, the reason why I can consume a lower amount of calories and not get tons of cravings and hunger and my energy is really good all day is because the calories I do consume are very, very nutrient rich. There's a lot of antioxidants, there's a lot of polyphenols, there's a lot of vitamins and minerals. And the gut health is so good that I'm maximizing the absorption and the synthesis of all those foods. So on a normal day, if you just ate less food, you will feel your energy kind of dip, and you will feel maybe a bit tired because you're not getting as many vitamins and minerals and micronutrients into your rotation. So when you start using a GLP peptide, you need to be very aware of getting a very nutrient-rich diet and to basically help you sustain a high energy level, to sustain a high performance output. That's when you'll see the weight loss, but you'll feel tired. And I would say most people fall into that category. Most people that do 75 hard, most people that do diet challenges, they cut calories, they lose weight, but they don't have an optimal diet, so they lose energy, they get foggy, they feel tired, and all the negative effects that come with you just feeling like a sloth. That's not how a true business athlete operates. We have to play a smarter game than that. And then the other component, like I said, is intelligent resistance training. So depending on your age and your goal, you want to be training big muscle groups at least two times per week. So whether it's like 2 upper body sessions or 2 lower body sessions. See, a lot of guys will do this sort of typical gym bro split, where it's like legs once, shoulders, chest, back, arms. 1 time a week sessions is usually not very intelligent in terms of optimal. It's better than nothing, but it's not intelligent in terms of optimal. So big muscle groups, 2 times a week, and the volume can even vary depending on your age and how much inflammation you have in your body. If you're someone that is a bit older or you've been dealing with some hormonal issues, you need to be mindful about your training volume. So how many sets are you doing? You might want to do 2 high quality sets instead of like 4. But it depends on your physiology. Again, why it's so useful to get in mastermind groups like the Business Athlete Council, because I can easily help you determine those variables very quickly. But you definitely need to incorporate weight resistance training into the rotation. It's got to be a key thing. So I typically would say like a push-pull legs, upper body, lower body split, or an upper body, lower body, upper body, lower body. Now, in some instances, if you're a bit older and you need more time to recover, like maybe 3 full body sessions a week. So I say this because the frequency and the volume matters. And if you aren't doing any real weight training, if you're just doing cardio and you're using a GLP-1 like Semaglutide, you'll lose so much muscle mass. You'll downregulate your metabolism so hard and fast. And then what happens is it gets really hard to sustain it. It gets really hard to sustain the fat loss because your metabolism is so low. Your body's burning so few calories. One of the things that I thought was quite interesting was that in Retatrutide, it seemed like a lot of the weight didn't get regained long term after the cessation of the Retatrutide. Now, in some people, it does, depending on the stress of the person, depending on the coping tools of the person. There's a few variables. What I would tell you, though, is that I would pulse something like this. I would use it like strategically in pulses. So you could either microdose it in little bursts to kind of get the lipid enhancing effect, the blood sugar level enhancing effect, and the fat loss if you want that. Or you might run like a sort of a 8-week process and then do 4 weeks off. 8 weeks on, 4 weeks off. There's many different protocols I talk about in the group. It really just depends on where you're at with your goal and how far you have to go and what you're willing to do. So I would say if I was going to give you a summary of like an optimal checklist of maximizing Retatrutide or any GLP-1 peptide, and this kind of ties back into fat loss in general, I would say as many micronutrients, vitamins and minerals in your diet as possible. So eat the rainbow, lots of whole foods, lots of macro bowl stuff, lots of micronutrients, first and foremost. At least 1 gram of protein per pound of target body weight. So if you're undershooting your protein, not good. So you want to make sure you're getting enough of that in. Otherwise, you'll lose weight, but that weight will be some muscle mass. I would also say make sure that you have an intelligent weight training protocol. Make sure that you are focusing on optimizing your digestion. Because if it's going to slow down your digestion a little bit, You want to make sure that you're not doing other things to make you constipated. Now, again, what you'll find is that you won't get these side effects, or they won't be substantial if you dose accurately. So I'm not going to give you dosing protocols on here. That's why you get into the masterminds for that. But what I'm going to tell you is that you start low and you slowly taper up week to week based on those biofeedback responses. And what happens is you don't ever get to the point where you're feeling negative adverse effects. So you'll start to notice that you just don't get as hungry. You'll notice that food noise turns down. And you might notice that your digestion feels a little bit more bloated. And in that case, we taper the dose back a touch. It's all based on the person's tolerance and how much they're willing to experience. If someone's like, I don't like any bloating at all, well, we just taper the dose back a touch. We find that perfect dose for you. That's the thing you to remember, guys, is the dose makes the poison. Now, I would also say that you want to be focusing on sleep. Because if you are not sleeping well, that is like a stress response in and of itself. And one of the ways to maintain and sustain muscle mass is better sleep, because that's when testosterone and growth hormone get released. So typically what you'll notice with people that don't sleep well, or they don't really pay attention to sleep, is they're almost skinny fat. They don't have a lot of muscle mass because their sleep's not great. So again, that's a whole other avenue. It's a whole other thing to explore. But I just wanted to mention sleep optimization is very, very important. Now, beyond that, I just want to close by saying there's no right or wrong to this, guys. There's camps that say you don't need these things. There's camps that say they're very helpful. I've seen people achieve the result at both ends of the spectrum. I don't think that there's anything wrong with trying and testing these things based on the information that you have. I don't think you want to use them as a crutch. I think you want to do these other things in conjunction as well as you can. But I also think at a certain point, if you've been trying and you just are not there, like that dopamine neurochemical signal is so strong, that food noise is so strong, you might find that this helps break that pattern and it changes your life. So it is a powerful tool. It is a powerful tool, but it's not a necessity either. I've seen many people get amazing results without using these things. And I've seen people get good results using them. And like I said, the primary side effects I've seen is bloating and digestive issues, constipation, and nausea. And I only ever see that happen if the dose gets ramped up too hard too fast. So I want to tell you guys that think of peptides like another tool in the tool belt, right? It will not replace a very sound, solid diet protocol and making sure that you're getting outside, walking every day in the light and getting your step count and, hitting your hydration targets with your spring water and doing some intelligent weight training with progressive overload. And even just being in a good environment with positive people. A lot of people's issues with their weight and with food and emotional eating comes from they're in toxic environments. The self-talk is not good. The things they focus on is negative. And in many ways, your physical body is an outward representation of your internal psychological state. So if you want to know what someone's true internal psychological dialogue looks like, their body will often give away signs. It's why I always say you are a walking billboard. And I would tell you that it is absolutely worth getting in great shape and losing the body fat. I'll just kind of close off by saying that as a business athlete, you are your brand, you are a walking billboard. If you're puffy and bloated looking and fat, you can be a great person, very intelligent, really friendly. People will love you. But you will maximize everything you're doing more when you also get in great shape. It doesn't mean you can't have success, but it does mean that you will maximize everything even more when you get in great shape. And that's an amazing thing. That's an exciting thing to contemplate. But then the other thing is that I would tell you, what are you modeling? With your children, with your spouse, with your team. You set the standard. And so if you want them to be healthier, if you want them to perform at a high level, if you want them to look after themselves, you've got to do it first. You have to model it. You have to go first. especially with your team. If you want your team to perform better, you perform better. If you want your kids to not go through the pain and the suffering and the struggle that maybe you went through when you got bullied, when you were in school and you were getting picked on because you were overweight, give them the tools to not do that. Now, I'm not saying get them on semaglutide, but what I'm saying is get them to lock their diet in. Get them to focus on some healthy food upgrades. Take a walk with them every day. Get them active in sports. You show them how it's done. You lead from the front. You be the high tide that rises all ships. So just remember, these things, they've been studied in Russia for a long time. They generally have a very good safety profile. Yes, there can be some random side effects. It's more than likely from people that had taken a range of random things and doing all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff too. The normal side effects are pretty mild, but you do need to make sure you use the right brands and you need guidance around this. Otherwise, you will get yourself into issues. And it's not going to replace you working on yourself, on your identity, on your character, like you as a person. So go out there today, weigh up these options, consider what you want to do. And just remember, like this is a collection of ideas. None of it's right or wrong. I'm never here to tell you, hey, you should do this or not. I'm not even here to tell you I've got all the answers, because I don't. I know a thing or two, and I've got a few results to back it. But at the end of the day, I want you to do your own due diligence, do your own research, trust your own instincts, but go out there and be that high tide that rises all ships.